Okay, recording. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brian McGonigal. I'm the manager of alumni community engagement for the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, as well as the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. Thank you for joining us for the Rutgers Alumni Association Marine and Coastal Sciences virtual tour. This event continues to be sponsored by the Rutgers Alumni Association annually, bringing this valuable research information to Rutgers alumni and giving you a chance to experience what the department is doing. So a few things to go over before we get started. This event is being recorded, just be aware. We ask that everybody remain muted and off visual during the presentation. The event is basically 3 segments. We'll have each segment, we'll have a Q&A, a brief Q&A afterwards. Feel free to enter your questions into the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. At the end of the event, if we have some extra time, you will be invited, if you want, because we have such a small group, to just come off mic if you like and ask questions at the end. But through the presentation, please just enter your questions through the chat and we'll answer them in order as time permits. And I believe that's it. So I'm going to hand it off to Oscar Schofield. He is the chair of the Department of Marine and Coastal Sciences at Rutgers. So Oscar, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me. I'm excited to have you all here. I hope next year we'll be back to our normal thing where we can actually give you a physical tour with all the fun robots and toys. But this is better than nothing, and I'm just going to give a little intro to the department and some of the things we've done. And then we had the graduate students helped put together a virtual sort of walking tour through our facilities. So we'll show that. And then we're very lucky to have Janine Barr sort of following up at the end. And she's a graduate student down at the Haskell Shellfish Lab. So I'm going to share my screen. And I think you should be seeing it now. Presentation. Okay. So I'm the chair of Marine and Coastal Sciences, and we are a department of about 35 faculty, and we're a young department. Rutgers didn't have marine sciences really in any unified way until 1988, and the state decided it was missing the boat given the importance of the Jersey Shore and the ocean to our economy, and has formed this department that's grown and gone on to lots of accolades. So 88 is when the department was formed. In the early 1990s is when we established our graduate program, and we've since then conferred over 100 advanced degrees, PhD and masters. It was in the mid-90s we started our undergraduate program. Currently, we have about 100 majors and minors enrolled. And in the late 90s, we incorporated scuba directly into the education program. And then in 2020, we started a master's program focused on meeting the needs of the maritime industry. And it's just starting out. We've gotten only the COVID slowed it down. It was the second year, but every student who's graduated from that program has been hired by industry before they even finished. So that is good. So let me tell you, the thing about the department, it has a history of firsts. I'm just going to give you a few select examples. The department actually is really old, and down where Janine works, and the shellfish research really was some of the first research at Rutgers. So even though it didn't have a formal program, we started looking at ocean observing back in 1888. And it guided the science in terms of monitoring oysters and shellfish. And this information actually resulted in a Supreme Court case, the US Supreme Court, about clean water laws. And Rutgers was central to establishing the basis of clean water laws. It had to, the focus was on the impact of New York dumping pollution into the ocean affecting coastal New Jersey. And New Jersey won that case. And it started with Julian Nelson. There's a picture of him next to his real fancy lab out in the swamps, and has grown since. Beyond having a big impact on sort of environmental policy and law, it's had a big impact on technology. So the map you see there is Tuckerton, New Jersey. We have a field station. And back in the 1990s, the very first scientific cable dedicated to science in the world was deployed. And essentially, you can think of it as an extension cord out to sea that allows you to plug in sensors and measure things continuously. Since that first initial deployment, you see the spool of cable on our docks there. It was 11 tons. It actually shrank and pushed the actual docks down into the mud by 3 feet. There's globally been about a $1 billion investment in scientific observation things. The other thing is we've been innovators in robotics. So this is what we call a REMUS. It's a propeller-driven AUV, was developed by Rutgers scientists. And then below that is a global map where our autonomous gliders are, and you'll actually see them in the videos. We do sort of a walking tour through our building. So we have a history of innovating and leading that way. We've made many fundamental discoveries. These are just one. So the guy who founded marine sciences at Rutgers was Frederick Grassley, and that's a picture of him up in the corner. He actually is credited with discovering the hydrothermal vents and finding an alternative form of life that didn't require sunlight. We've innovated in storm forecasting. It grew out of the data we collected from robots during Hurricanes Irene and Sandy. And that's leading to a whole reshaping of the National Weather Service as we speak. Scott Glenn, who's one of our professors, is actually designing the future Weather Service right now for Congress. And then there have been lots of wacky things. This is Kay Beidel, and he got access to the oldest ice on the planet, came from Antarctica. And he was able to essentially bring back to life the microbes that were living in this 10 million year old ice. And actually it has really fundamental, important aspects to understanding how long life can live in suspended animation. Your DNA will eventually degrade, and he could get the first calculations of that. And this is just 3 of many fundamental discoveries. I wanted to show you sort of how the data has evolved. So in the left panel here, this is a numerical model for atmospheric wind. And on the side here are measured ocean currents. And this is data collected when Hurricane Elsa passed us just a few weeks ago. So you'll see the wind ramping up in the south, and then you can look here and see the immediate response of the ocean. So here's the passage of Elsa, and then you can see the currents changing direction and also speed. And this is the type of data you couldn't collect before. It's very miserable to be out on a ship in a hurricane. And, you know, fundamentally it's dangerous. And now we can do it autonomously. And that's one of the sort of things Rutgers in marine science is known as being world-leading innovators on. Very highly decorated faculty and graduate students. just last week, we found out that there were 4 Rutgers graduate students who were awarded Knaus Fellows from NOAA. That was the most of any institution in the nation. We've had lifetime honors. This is Shimeng Guo down at the Haskell lab. And most of the strains of oysters you eat that are grown farming-wise, Shimeng designed, essentially. We've been honored by geophysical unions, foundations, other research agencies, Research Council, high profile within Rutgers, American Geophysical Union. And really the thing that brings me to work and gets excited every day are all these amazing people that are doing amazing things. And I just get to sit and learn from them. We do a lot of our research around the world, but we spend a lot of time in New Jersey, and Janine's going to talk about that. We're very involved in looking at what's going to be the impact of offshore wind off New Jersey. So you see this little map here. These blue areas is where there's going to be a great deal of offshore wind developed in the future. And New Jersey's goal is 7,500 megawatts. And that will meet our renewable coals. And essentially the observing network is now monitoring what the potential impacts would be. We have robots out today in the water listening for right whales and what the impact is. The data that Rutgers Marine Science collect gets piped directly into the Coast Guard and has reduced search areas when a boat goes down by 75%. These are the number of rescues in 2014. And now they log directly into Rutgers when they do it. And then there's all the impacts of how the ocean is going to change in the future. And so we have fundamental programs in all these different aspects, ranging from ocean acidification to upwelling, et cetera. But, you know, as alumni and, you know, if you have kids who will be joining us as students, why do we want you to be involved? We're here to serve the citizens of New Jersey and the nation, and we want to share what our work is. And so you should all take this as an invitation for when we are no longer in a pandemic world to please come by the building. We offer tours spontaneously when people are interested. We redesigned the cool room. It'll be finished hopefully in 2 weeks. And you can come and see with yourself what we're doing. And Brian and Melissa, who are also on the call, can help set things up with a group. But please feel free to come join us. We want you to be part of our team badly. So that was my quick synopsis. Now I'm gonna stop sharing. And
I think we have a couple of questions.
Great.
Okay, so one question from Christine. What types of microbes were isolated from the Antarctic ice? Were
they were all that's a good question. They were bacteria, and there appeared to maybe also been viruses. And it was a unique geologic feature which allowed us to sort of go back and date the ice. And it was a long and slow, laborious process. When Kay got them growing, we had certain tools to verify they were actually living. And the genomes that had degraded by about like 15%. And so it can put sort of bounds on sort of suspended animation sort of technologies in the future. Yeah. Yes, so bacteria and some viruses.
Okay. Another question. What do you feel is the biggest technological advancement or development for ocean observing that has happened in history?
Yeah, the biggest first one was ships and boats, yeah, and the ability to be out there. And that's really how we anchored it. And then the second revolution they talk about in oceanography was satellites, because you could finally get a map of information. But the one that has really exploded in the last 30 years, associated with a lot of the efforts we've been doing at Rutgers, is what we call omnipresence. So before, we were very happy if you had a telephone link back to shore. And so it had a telepresence. But now with global communications, you can have robots out in the water and they can call home anywhere. And so we can be anywhere in the ocean under all conditions and study things that were too violent to study before. I've been in some pretty nasty storms, and it's a good way to get hurt. And so now we let a robot. Why send a human out on a boat? And these ships are very expensive. An oceanographic vessel costs about $75,000 a day to run. And that's even before you pay for the science. So why spend all that money when most of the sensors are about the size of a pen? And the other thing is, you can essentially be in the ocean all the time. You might have read that there was a radio tagged great white that was passing off New Jersey. So we can put sensors on animals. We can put sensors on robots. We can put sensors on drifters. And so we can get a three-dimensional view of the ocean over time. And that was science fiction when I was a graduate student.
Oh, great. I think that's all the questions we have for this time. So if you do have any other questions as the audience, you can ask them again at the end of the event. But Oscar, if you'd like to move on to the next segment.
Sure. So what we've got now is it's a 10-minute video. So if you don't like it, you can go get a cup of coffee. But essentially the video was really put together by the graduate students just to show you sort of some of our facilities and what they do. And it was put together by undergraduates from the Mason Gross School of Art. And one of the things I love about being at Rutgers is it's a state institution. And so I get to work with the English department, the art department, the geology department, and bring all the various school to bear. So the video was actually made by a freshman, Vaughn. So let me share the screen and then.
Just remember to hit those two little boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Let me blow the screen up.
Hi, my name is Jackie Beach. I am a second-year PhD candidate here in the Department of Marine and Coastal Science at Rutgers University, where I study physical oceanography.
Hi, my name is Quentin Ducasse. I am a second-year graduate student working with Oscar Schofield. I am a biological oceanographer.
My name is Ryan Globke, and I'm a PhD student here at Rutgers University studying the history of our oceans and our climate.
So welcome to the Seawater Lab. Here we have some gliders that make up our fleet of gliders here at Rutgers. And we have been partnering with Teledyne for over 20 years to deploy these instruments into the ocean. So the gliders that you see behind me are automated underwater vehicles, meaning that we can throw them in the ocean and pilot them remotely to have them stay in the ocean for up to months at a time, taking measurements. Welcome to the glider room. This is where we ready all of our autonomous underwater vehicles that we call gliders. This one right here is getting ready to be deployed on the Western Antarctic Peninsula as part of a long-term ecological research project.
As part of a lot of the biological research here, since we deal with microbial organisms like bacteria and viruses and phytoplankton, we have to keep a lot of them in culture or grow our own supplies of them rather than going out to the ocean and sampling them. And this is what rooms like this are really important for. Yeah, so this is one of the seawater rooms that we have up here on the second story of this main aquarium section. And they're each allow you to create any kind of incubation system that you want. For instance, this one is being used to hold corals. currently, but it can be used to do any kind of experiment or any kind of other incubation system or manipulation. So as part of a lot of my work, we're interested in the physiology, the morphology, the biology of a lot of the phytoplankton in those communities in the ocean. And so in order to assess some of that, we use some of the machines here. So this is what is called an imaging flow cytobot, an IFCB. We've named ours Floyd. And what it does is it takes all of the little cells, all the individual phytoplankton within a water sample, and it narrows them down to single file. And when it's in that single file, it takes it to a little tube and takes images of them using a microscope.
Most people are familiar with the concept of tree rings. You cut a tree open, you can count the rings back in time, see how old the tree is. But what scientists in my field do is we can analyze the chemistry of those rings, and that preserves a record of Earth's climate history. Now, these tiny zooplankton, foraminifera, they build their shells, and the chemistry of their shells reflect the chemistry of the seawater when they live. And so we can pull these shells from sediments buried deep in the ocean floor where these organisms were living 11,000 years ago. And so the chemistry of their shells can give us clues about the chemistry of the ocean 11,000 years ago. We can piece together all of these different facts about the ocean a long time ago, and we can then tease out the role that the ocean played in regulating Earth's history in the past. And by learning from our past, we can better anticipate how the climate is going to evolve in the future.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Valenti and I'm standing at the Rutgers University Marine Field Station where I work as a postdoctoral fellow on microplastics in larval fish. This is our boat basin where we store our research vessels and also where we conduct our long-term fish trapping study. This is the boathouse where we keep the supplies we need for field work, such as the plankton nets that I use to collect the larval fish for my microplastics research. This is the larval fish identification lab where we identify the larval fish we collect and then I use them for my research. This is the microplastics lab where I do my research. This is a clean room, so we try and keep the door closed, and you can see that these fume hoods to my right have a nice cover over them to try and keep out any contamination, because that is one of the biggest issues with microplastics research. This is our reference collection, which consists of a bunch of preserved fish and crabs. And we use this reference collection to help us identify different fish and crab species that we may not know exactly what they are. And we can use this collection in addition to reference books to help us. So this is our Remus room, where we keep our Remus, which is an autonomous underwater vehicle. And we use this to monitor the coastal oceans and estuaries around the world. This part of the Remus is a side scan sonar, so we can kind of get an image of the bottom. You'll notice that the Remus has a propeller, and that's a little bit different than the gliders that you may have seen on main campus. So this allows it to go in those shallower coastal areas as opposed to the glider, which goes in deeper water areas.
Hi, my name is Janine Barr. I am a second-year master's student at Rutgers in the Oceanography department. I'm also a Coastal Climate Risk and Resilience Fellow, and I'm here to give you a tour of the Haskell Shellfish Research Lab in South Jersey. At this dock, we normally have two boats. Our one big boat is normally right here at the end of the dock, but it's out in the field today. That's a larger, but not too large, research vessel that does all that we need it to do. It's small but mighty. So that's not here today, but we do have a second research vessel here. It's called the Veliger, which is actually a stage in oyster development, so we think it's a fun name and very appropriate for the work that we do here. So we're here in the main hub of the Haskell Shellfish Research Lab, which is our wet lab. There's a lot of work that goes on in here. Everyone in the lab probably has a project going on in here at some point. You see raceways, and actually there's a good example of an experiment happening right now. We are raising some baby horseshoe crabs that were collected about a month ago on the Delaware Bay side of Jersey. And so we're hopeful that we can raise a couple of those to full size and hopefully release them back into the wild. So now we're in the ecology lab, which is another general purpose space here at the Haskell Lab. Ultimately, what goes on in this lab is the processing of all kinds of shellfish, whether that's clams, scallops, oysters, you name it, we've processed them in here. And that involves measuring them, weighing them, and sometimes doing some sampling of their tissue to make sure that they're healthy and happy. This room is the hood room, or the hood lab, and it's where we do processing of some oyster disease work, or some oyster samples for disease work. And this lab has also been used for teaching. There's an aquaculture class that comes down here where we learn how to process samples like you see here. Now we're in the histology lab, where slides are made of preserved oyster and other shellfish tissue. Slides that were made here can be scanned for parasites, pathogens, or other pathological conditions. We look at samples for various projects, monitoring of disease status or population health, especially in the Delaware Bay, also mortality. And oysters are sent here from farms across the East Coast for health assessments that are conducted here as well. Welcome to one of my favorite rooms in the lab, which is our library. We have lots of books and resources in this room that have accumulated over many, many years of research. And this library space is used for studying, and it's also used for presentations, and also our stock assessment workshop that happens in February every year, where people from multiple states, and specifically in the Delaware Bay area, will get together to talk about stock allocations for the oysters.
So that was a virtual tour. So in the past alumni events, we had physical tours, and we're hoping we'll be able to do it. But what was really nice was the grad students and art students getting together to at least give you a feel for the space we're at, which will hopefully be opening up this fall. And you can come see things actually yourself.
Thanks, Oscar. That was a great video. Good job by Vaughn there. Couple questions. What would you say is the most beneficial data that the gliders gather?
Every glider measures temperature and salinity, how salty is the water. And what's really key about that, that goes into all the weather models. You know, because the temperature of the ocean affects the atmosphere, and there's an interaction. So I would say that that is probably the core measurement gliders make. But because the glider has excess space, if you build any sensor that fits in a bread box, a glider can carry it. And so it really depends on the types of questions. So most people don't know it, but off the coast of New Jersey is the most advanced ocean observing system on the planet. And your water quality measured in the coastal ocean is done with robots. It's the only place in the world that it's done. And the advantage of that is if you do a traditional measurement, you go out in a boat, you collect a bucket of water, you make measurements. And if you work really hard, maybe you can collect about 50 data points in a day. A robot in a day will collect several thousand points, and going out in a boat is expensive. And so the state could afford to do 13 days of sampling over the summer off our coastline. And now the robots are continuously patrolling off the coastline and collecting tens of millions of data points. For the offshore wind, there's a lot of concern. Will it impact the migration of the right whales, which are in danger? And, the problem is the way you look for whales is just like whale watching. You're on a boat, you look for them and then try to avoid them or shut down construction. That's the plan. But we've developed some new robots that have very sensitive listening devices, and we can hear the whales talking to each other underwater. It means we can sample at night when there's no sunlight. It means we have a better view of the ocean in terms of protecting the whales and also minimizing the construction impact. If you can only people out there to do construction during daylight hours, it'll take much longer and have a bigger impact. If the robots work, we'll essentially be able to move to 24-hour construction because they won't have to stop when it's dark. So the whale watchers could see the whales, and you will potentially save the power companies as well as the state close to $1 billion. And so I think, what's exciting about the gliders is they can measure whatever problem you need to solve, whether it's managing fish, managing whales, to what's the water quality, to improving the weather forecast. So we know when a hurricane's going to hit, what's the intensity when it hits the shore.
Great. Another question, can you just talk a little bit about some of the partners that Marine and Coastal Sciences collaborates with for the gliders, Tuckerton, Haskell, different aspects of the department?
Yeah, I will let Janine talk about Haskins, but right now we have a small focused group as a department, and we form long-standing relationships with companies. So the company that builds and sells the gliders developed it in partnership with Rutgers. We have the best part of the job. They build it, we break it, we tell them how we broke it, and then they can iterate to get a better product. We collaborate a lot with federal agencies, where the Navy's Glider Technical Center, the Navy now has about 250 gliders, and so we train them on how to use them and the types of things you can do with them. We work a lot with state agencies. New Jersey DEP, we do the water quality measurements in partnership with them. With the offshore wind, one reason that New Jersey looks like it's going to be a particularly profitable part to do it is because we ran sea breeze models for 30 years. And a lot of the companies come from Europe because that's where there is an offshore wind industry. And when they came and looked at the data available here in New Jersey, they commented they'd never seen such a good database, which is going to allow them to minimize their impact. And also the general public, all the data we collect is free and is presented live over the web. So if you do a Google search for "Are you cool?", you can go in and you can look at the data from the robots and the models and the radars at the very same moment I can look at. And we get about 6,000 unique visitors a month to the website. And in summertime, like right about now, we average about 250,000 web hits a day, and 70% of the general public.
Great. And the question came in. One person wrote, their daughter is starting college in 2022. Marine biology, marine science is her area of interest. What undergraduate degrees would you say are best to enter into this field or area of graduate studies? Yeah,
actually, I think that the most important thing is, making sure that they get a science degree. Marine science is a really heavy science major. The way our undergraduate major is set up is you have to choose sort of a focus area, like biological oceanography, chemical oceanography, physical oceanography. And it's set up so that if you're organized, you can get it's very easy. I mean, it's an extra 2 classes to get a double major in biology and biological oceanography. So it gives a lot of freedom for students to go to med school, go there. What we're finding now is there has been chronically too few people trained in how to work in aquatic systems. You know, and the industries that we have in the ocean are much larger than people might expect. So we live here in the Garden State. The fishery, commercial fisheries and recreational fisheries generate 4 times the economic impact than all of the terrestrial farms in New Jersey. So one thing is to make sure your daughter takes a lot of math, you know, takes a lot of science, but then also to get into a program that allows them to go and field. Our undergraduates go with us as part of our team members. I, except for COVID years, typically take 2 to 3 undergraduates to Antarctica on my annual expedition down there. And the best way to figure out if you want to do something for a living is to do it with your own hands. And so our program is built around that. Environmental science has lots of good programs. The one thing about that department, it's very big. And so you want to make sure they have a good focus area to get the hands-on experience. We have an undergraduate advisor that is also available to people who are just starting out. And so I encourage you to sort of reach out to the various departments, and we'll be happy to give you advice, suggestions, so that she can make the right decision for where she wants to go. There are connections between marine science, environmental science, geologic science, atmospheric science is very strong at Rutgers. There's an institute that binds us together. And so she would be taking classes from all those departments, regardless of what degree she specifically was focused in.
Okay, thanks, Oscar. I think that's all the questions we have for now. So feel free to move forward with the presentation.
Great. So I'm going to hand it over to Janine Barr. She is a graduate student and is going to tell you her story. She's a rock star. She's one of those Knaus fellows that got announced last week, which is very, very competitive. And she knocked it out of the park and got one of those fellows. So congratulations to her. And Janine, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Oscar. And thank you for that very, very, very kind introduction. So yeah, like Oscar said, let me get geared up here with sharing my screen. Okay. Can everybody see that okay?
It looks great.
Okay, thanks, Oscar. So hi, everyone. My name is Janine Barr. I am a second-year master's student in the Department of Coastal and Marine Sciences, pursuing a degree in oceanography. So I'm here today to talk with you all about what research is like in our program and how much I truly enjoy this work. So I'll be focusing on my research specifically, but if my face looks familiar at all, it's because you did just see me in that video. So I'm happy to be having a more interactive conversation with you guys. So first, a little bit about me, especially since we got that question about undergrad and what to study. I graduated from Gettysburg College, which is a small liberal arts school in Pennsylvania, back in 2015. And I got 2 BS degrees, one in biology and one in environmental studies. After I went to Gettysburg, I worked for a few years at the Environmental Protection Agency as a research fellow, doing work in water quality standards, so national policy work, which was very eye-opening for me. And from that experience, I really wanted to get my hands dirty again and come back in the research world, because my job at the EPA inspired me to really pursue a career in marine policy. And I thought, to be a good marine policymaker, I wanted to better understand the marine system itself. So I came to Rutgers to study oceanography, and I'm very grateful that I did. My advisor is Dr. Daphne Monroe, and I'm based here in South Jersey at the Haskell Shellfish Research Lab. So just to orient us a little bit, this slightly pixelated map of New Jersey, the star here, as most of you are familiar with, is New Brunswick, New Jersey, where the main department is based from. And I work down here at the bottom blue star in Cumberland County in New Jersey. And so the project that I do with Daphne is studying the water quality benefits that oysters provide in the Delaware Bay ecosystem and elsewhere in the mid-Atlantic. So the Delaware Bay has a lot of oysters, whether that's wild or farmed oysters through aquaculture. So I'm trying to measure how much the oysters filter out of the water column to provide cleaner water for the area, with the ultimate goal that oyster farmers might be able to get involved in nutrient management programs in New Jersey down the line if they have this information about how much good their oysters do for the water column. So my next 3 slides that I'll be showing you will be highlighting the 3 things I've enjoyed most about my work since starting here back in 2019. So first, the process of developing my research project was really great. What you can see here in the picture with the people in it is the chamber that we use to measure the oyster filtration rates that are the basis for my thesis. So essentially what we do is we put oysters in this chamber for about 2 or 3 hours. And over that period of time, we collect water samples as well as oyster poop. So oysters actually have 2 kinds of poop. They have feces and they have pseudofeces. Feces are poop that the oysters have actually digested and they've gotten nutrients from. But pseudofeces is material that the oysters have kind of tasted and they've decided they don't want to eat that. It's not worth their energy to process. So all of these pieces of information, the water, the different kinds of poop, we measure that and I'm able to back calculate what their filtration rates are and their water quality benefits, which is really cool. A lot of time with poop. It's a good time. And so that is the bulk of the work. And this work was not done solely from my brain by any means. So I was able to travel to a NOAA lab in Milford, Connecticut, because they have a system exactly like this that a scientist named Eve Gallimani developed. So I was able to meet with them and learn about their work with this system. And it was a great networking opportunity that I had even before I started grad school. So I ended up working at Haskell for about a month before I started classes at Rutgers, which was a really great opportunity. Also, just developing this research was a great collaborative experience with DMCS faculty. So I don't have the motor skills to build this chamber that you're seeing. And so there was a wonderful person who recently retired, but he actually built this equipment for me. And it was really great to consult with him and like meet with him on a very regular basis to build it. Basically with any research experience, there is going to be a lot of trial and error. So you can see an example of that trial and error on the top screen here. I actually was working with some folks in Milford to develop this piece of the experiment that kind of happens before the oysters poop is collected. So that's what these different sandwich boxes are. And I worked with them to kind of develop a better system than what they had been using. So that was really exciting. And they actually had mocked up what you see in this top picture here. And so then I just recreated it in a more mobile friendly format. So that was really fun to be a part of. I've also, well, the next thing that has been great in this research is that it has allowed me to follow my interests. So above everything else, I came to Rutgers because I wanted some on-the-ground research experience that not only helped me understand and the scientific community understand the aquatic world, but to also help people specifically in New Jersey. So my advisor, Daphne, encouraged us before I even started as a graduate student here. She helped me write a student grant to do the research I'm doing now. Unfortunately, we didn't get that student grant, but it was a great way for me to gain some writing experience. And the student grant that I wrote did serve as the core for a larger grant that Daphne applied to. So we ended up getting
more money, and that happened through the Northeastern Regional Aquaculture Center. So by having that writing experience and getting this other grant, I was actually able to expand the different areas that I was able to do experiments in for my thesis. So these are the 3 sites that I do my oyster filtration work in. So we look at 3 different farms. One of them is up north in Barnegat Bay. One of them is closer to Haskell with that blue star in the Delaware Bay. And the other farm is in Rehoboth Bay. So we get to do a lot of travel for this grant, which luckily COVID did not have a big impact on. But it's been really great to see these different ecosystems and to collect information from such different areas. I've also been lucky enough to incorporate climate change into my research. So oysters tend to, well, New Jersey will be impacted by climate change in many ways. One of the ways is from increased precipitation in the area, which causes more fresh water to go into coastal ecosystems. My hypothesis is that oysters will not like that fresh water influence because they generally filter more water in saltier environments. So I'm able to do a side experiment with some of my oysters where I stress them out in low salinity conditions, and then I redo the filtration experiment to see how climate change might impact their ability to provide those water quality benefits, which has been really fun. And so the last thing that I've enjoyed, among other things, is that I've been able to practice leadership skills and get other younger students excited about science, especially oyster poo. I've been the student lead on this research project, obviously under the advisement of my advisor, but I've been on the ground and responsible for collecting all this data at 3 different farms and 1 oyster reef that I didn't talk about. So in total, I've conducted 25 field day experiments over the past calendar year, which has been a very rewarding experience. But none of this would be possible without all the wonderful volunteers that you see here. So technicians who have been with the Rutgers Lab, some Rios interns. So we have REU students with us right now, which have been a huge help in the field, as well as some Rutgers honors students who have joined us. So it really has been a very diverse group of students who have been able to help out and get their hands dirty, which has been great. So here are just some pictures of fun times in the field. We have thumbs up during a wonderful field day in Delaware. We have some filtration work happening in a car ride on the ferry that goes between Lewes, Delaware and Cape May, New Jersey, which was very exciting. And doing some filtration work in the back of a car because science is everywhere. And if you guys have any questions after today, feel free to email me. That's my Rutgers email. I'm happy to answer any questions about my experiences or grad school in general. And it's been really great talking with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Just a note to the audience, feel free to enter questions into the chat. Also, if you'd like to come off your own mic and audio visual, you're welcome to do that. Just be aware that you would be recorded if you do that. Otherwise, you can enter your questions in the chat. So a couple questions, Janine. What is like a typical day at Haskins, or is there a typical day?
So I think a typical day is very person specific. So if you're a graduate student, you're spending most of your time either conducting field work or lab work related to your thesis. If you have any downtime, you as a graduate student, you are likely going to be volunteering to help other technicians or professors down here doing some of their work, because there's always a need for helping hands, and it's a great way to get exposure to other work that people are doing. Like Oscar mentioned Shming Guo, who works down here. He does a lot of genetic work, so it's fun to help him process some oyster samples for those genetic analyses. And if you are a full-time actual employee who's not a graduate student, those people also have projects that they're responsible for. So one person, her name is Jenny, she organizes a program called PORTS, which is a outreach program for elementary school students and maybe a broader age range. I'm forgetting some of the details of that program, but it's a way to introduce students in South Jersey to animals and the Delaware Bay ecosystem in general. So she's busy doing things like that and shoreline restoration work. So it really does vary. Your days are very hands-on, and it's a great way to learn about New Jersey and the Delaware Bay in general. And there's also a lot of meetings. If you're professors, I believe that's a big part of their day.
Thank you. I know we got a question. What are some of the significant private or public funding sources for research at the center?
Yeah, oceanography is a very expensive field to do research. And we raise a significant amount of money. We're one of the top 10 departments in the entire university. That includes all the different medical school departments. I think this last year, through competitive grants, the community as a whole raised $15 million. And the sources of it include federal agencies. There's a lot of funding from the National Science Foundation, NOAA, the National Office for Atmospheric and Ocean Research, the Navy is a funder often for technology development. We have a lot of funding that comes from NASA as well as private foundations. The Simons Foundation, the Schmidt Foundation, the Betelson Foundation. They're all competitive grants. And so the sort of bar is pretty high in terms, and the average success rate for grants nationally is about 5 to 10%. And I think our program, we're about 30% success rates. And it's because of really smart faculty and really smart graduate students like Janine sort of commented on. Our undergraduates and graduate students are central to our teams, and that includes competing for these funding sources. I'll just give you an example for our group. There's 5 faculty that sort of run the cool group that does all the observing technology. But our group is 35 people. And the only funding that comes from the university are for those 5 faculty. We raise all the other salaries through external sources. And that was one of the reasons why the university wanted to have an oceanography program. Janine, you probably have perspective given that you are sort of in such an applied field.
Specifically about where the funding comes from?
Yeah, and sort of that whole side of it from your end.
Yeah, I think so. I am not very well versed in how we're funded. I know we collaborate a lot with like NJDEP. They actually own our larger research vessels. So we have like, it's not Rutgers research vessel. They allow us to use it, and in exchange, they dock it at our dock kind of situation. So that's a money saver there. And I know a lot of the graduate students have won grants, which is great because they're able to supply their own funding for their research. And it's just lessening the burden, I suppose, elsewhere. But I don't want to say the wrong thing. So that's the most of what I know about the funding for us.
Yeah, that was perfect. The other thing is we do benefit from the generosity of the public. And so a good example was a few of us were at a meeting, and a very high level person in the government sat down with us, and his conversation started with, "I need you to do something for the good of your country." And you're just like, oh my God, what's he gonna want us to do? And he was really worried about undergraduates in science becoming risk adverse, that they're worried about it. And he said, "I want you to take a glider. I want you to have undergraduates fly it or pilot it underwater. And I want you to cross an ocean basin, which had never been done in human history." And that's something agency is not going to fund. there was a very generous donor who, wished to be anonymous. And so he provided the funds to build a brand new glider to cross an ocean basin. The first attempt we got from New Jersey to the Azores. That glider was eaten by a shark. And the undergraduates obviously were crushed and devastated, but the lesson was that's how science works. It's that research and error. And then we learned where the shark had bit the glider based on the engineering data we could download before it sank to the bottom of the sea. Rebuilt the glider, a new one. And that one did get from New Jersey all the way to Spain and was declared a historic artifact by the White House and the government of Spain. And it was Rutgers undergraduates that flew it and made history. And so federal agencies are our bulk funders, but resources come in from all different areas and allow us to do different things.
Thanks, Oscar. Question about the shark eating the glider. How do we know it was a shark and not something?
Yeah, so the glider was about 100 feet under the surface, so it was too deep for a ship to hit it. And it was in an area that is not frequented by submarines. And the glider was floating up, and it has wings on it. So if you're underneath it, it looks like a seal. And something came up from below, attacked it from the bottom, and displaced it in less than a second by almost 15 feet. So it was a very solid smack from underneath. And sharks, when they are feeding, they want to go in, they want to wound their prey, and then they hang out a little bit away, to essentially let the prey sort of bleed out, essentially. This shark came up from underneath, struck it. It displaced a sensor that was sticking off it, and that's where water started leaking in. And when water gets into a glider, we built behaviors into it. It panics. It goes, oh my God, I'm drowning. It ejects weights out of its body, which means it start floating up to the surface, and then sets up a global cell phone call to us directly. And when that particular event happened, me and my colleague Scott Glenn were at a NATO base in Europe, and we got the call from the glider, and we sat around with all the NATO people looking at the engineering data that was flowing off the glider. The glider was too far from land, so it was too expensive to go pick it up. And so we sat with it, and eventually it sank to the bottom. We routinely have shark attacks. We've had shark attacks off Florida, and you can see actually teeth marks in the hull. We actually had what we're pretty sure was a giant squid attack off Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean. The way evidence of that was, it was down deep, maybe 500 meters below the surface. Something grabbed it and held it in place for about 4 hours. And then the glider got away and got up to the surface. It was damaged. So we, over 2 months, piloted it back to Sri Lanka where we picked it up. And when a giant squid attacks like a fish, it grabs it with its tentacles, and it has a very large beak, and it'll essentially use the beak to take meat off it. And there were all these beak scratches, almost like a corn cob that was trying to go around to find why this thing tasted so bad and why there was no meat on it. So you had all the scratches, and where the suction cups are, they're pretty acidic. And so we had places where we had these big circular marks where the paint was peeling off because of the suction and the beak. So it's always a mystery. Our other big predator on glider are humans. Most humans, when they see a glider, think it's in trouble because it's moving slow, so they rescue it. It's pretty easy to tell when it's been rescued because once it's above the air, we can get the data all the time. So sometimes it'll show up on the turnpike and a glider can't drive 55 on the turnpike, so we can chase it down. The one funny story there was we had a glider off Australia, it got launched. It was like 3 in the morning our time, so we went to sleep. The glider surfaced to, download some data, and it surfaced right next to a guy who was fishing and drinking beer. So his natural response was to pull the glider into his boat. When we got up the next morning, he had driven into the docks and then driven Highway 34 out of Perth into the countryside. And he actually put it on his front lawn. We could see where it was. We could Google Earth his house. We started turning sensors on and off. We have one sensor called an altimeter that makes a chirping sound. And the neighbor looked over the fence and saw this thing on the guy's front lawn. And this was during one of the Gulf Wars. And here's something that looks like a cruise missile with a big American flag on it. And she threatened to call the police. All of a sudden, the glider's back in his truck. He drives into the warehouse district in Perth and dumps it behind some warehouses and drove away. Our Australian friends could then go pick it up and put it back in the water. We sent a letter to this guy because we knew what address he lived at. Our first letter pretended to be the CIA, telling him, don't ever touch our stuff again. And then a week later, we sent another letter saying, no, we're just a bunch of nerdy scientists, and sent him some Rutgers t-shirts. Yeah, so they're always an adventure to put in. And it's kind of like, if you have a teenage kid, you give them the car keys and you hope they come back in one piece and on time. And, that is sort of the life of a glider pilot.
Thanks, Oscar. Somebody did have a follow-up question that pretty much out of time, but I'll ask this one last question. Would another color besides yellow prevent sharks attacks on the gliders?
Not really, we don't think so. There are different colored gliders. Really we use the color so we can see it at the surface. You want something bright when you're trying to pick it up. That's why ours is yellow. They're also pink. And what a shark sees is more the shadow. So it's not really cueing off the color. It's cueing off the movement. The other predator I forgot to mention are the remora fish that attach to the belly of the glider. And these gliders are balanced essentially for a coffee cup's worth of water in their nose to fly appropriately. And so if you slap 1.5 foot fish on it, it's too heavy and sinks. And these remora fish will attach to them, and then the gliders will sink, and eventually you'll have to go pick it up. The only thing we've had success with remoras, and I don't know why, but essentially is pantyhose. If you put pantyhose over the body of a glider, you have fewer of these fish attaching to it. So it's that trial and error Janine was talking about. The ocean is a funky place, and we're learning about it in lots of different ways every day.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank Oscar and Janine for joining us today and providing us with this great presentation. Thank you so much. Also, many thanks to the Rutgers Alumni Association for, again, sponsoring this program. I hope you all got a lot out of it. There will be a follow-up email with some information if you have any questions. Also, recording of the program, we're planning to send you as well. If there's nothing else, thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.